Summer of Sickness, July 1st to the 31st coming soon. Salutations, Squadius Famius. So today I want to touch down on a topic that I'm really passionate about: vintage clothing. Now, for those of you who frequent my channel or have just known me for more than 5 minutes, you will know that I am a massive advocate for vintage clothing. So I thought, let's just add to this pile with how vintage can upgrade your wardrobe. But before we get into that, I just want to thank nordgreen for sponsoring today's video. nordgreen is a Copenhagen-based Danish watch brand designed by Jacob Wagner, and they invited me to choose one of their watches, and I picked a quirky little timepiece. The watches are of Scandinavian minimalist design. This particular watch is the native 32mm white dial with brown strap. But I just wanted to introduce you to nordgreen, and the really good thing about this brand is that they've put extensive effort in their social responsibilities. They're a part of a giving back program and are involved with a lot of local non-profit organizations. So if you're interested in their charity work or you want to participate in the giving back program, I will be leaving all of their links in the description down below. But wait, there's more. nordgreen are also giving me a 15% discount for all of you guys to use on their official website. If you want a funky little timepiece for 15% off, then just use the code SICKMATE at checkout. And with that, I just want to thank nordgreen again for sponsoring the video. And without further ado, how vintage can upgrade your wardrobe. So the first thing I feel I have to mention with vintage being implemented into a wardrobe is the fact that it can be transferred into many different styles. The point I'm trying to get at is that vintage can be implemented in so many different fashion circles and sects, and it's something that I believe has been overlooked for a little while now. I was first introduced into vintage during the whole heritage sportswear come up, where everyone was jumping on LS, Champion, Fila, Kappa, that kind of thing, and I've been in love with the scene ever since. Vintage clothing has been adopted into so many scenes. We've got the Americana type look that also use vintage pieces to build up the whole aesthetic, and of course you've got the archive scene, which is a little bit more curated, but a lot of people look back to earlier works of designers, Issey Miyake, Comme des Garçons, etc, etc. Some brands have even gone so far as to replicate vintage fashion, purposefully distressing pieces, paint splatters and tie-dye, slapping on nostalgia and brand graphics. I'm not saying I'm a purist, because some of these brands do a really good job of creating a pseudo vintage aesthetic, but the point I'm trying to make is vintage is somewhat sought after and still relevant. In my opinion, there's just something appealing about the imperfection aesthetic, the character, the rips and tears. There's just something about having a lived-in piece that gives it a sense of authenticity. So it seems there are almost limitless possibilities when it comes to implementing vintage clothing in different styles, just because of the nature of it all. I mean, vintage clothing is literally just a term for secondhand or older clothing. So it's fair to say that you can seamlessly implement a vintage piece into any outfit, and you can work with it to make it into a huge presence or just something really subtle to complement the outfit. So the next thing I want to talk about why vintage upgrades a wardrobe is the actual quality and the uniqueness of the piece. Let me explain. Before fast fashion and the whole one-use only culture, vintage offers us a little bit more in terms of quality. In my personal experience, most garments produced pre-2000s were actually built to last. For example, most plain white t-shirts in my wardrobe right now are more or less all vintage or thrifted. They're all t-shirts from more or less the 1990s or earlier, and they all have a boxier, thicker feel to them, and they're all pre-shrunk, so a large doesn't turn into a small after one spin cycle. So if anything, that's just an argument of fast fashion versus vintage. But the other good thing about vintage in this category is the fact that most of these pieces have so many different origins that it's really hard to find another exact vintage piece, if that makes sense. Like, you'll never see two of the same t-shirt in any one place most of the time. The nature of vintage is to offer you a unique piece and introduce you to styles that you wouldn't have found otherwise. For example, this is a vintage t-shirt from Ace Calf London. Upon the tiniest little bit of research, this is one of those biker calves that you find in in London and other locations, I presume, like a Five Guys, but just with bikes. And I wouldn't have found that out if I didn't find this t-shirt. It's outside of my circle. Low-key education. And of course, through vintage, you're gonna go through the years, so to speak, and look at different styles. If you're in a vintage store, you might see graphic t-shirts from things you've never seen before, brands that you've never heard of, cardigans, shirts, jackets. So that's how you upgrade your wardrobe, fam. The next point I want to make is that vintage can be as affordable as you like. From thrifted to curated stores, vintage clothes are normally cheaper than high street and brand new clothes. For example, I remember buying a Champion reverse sleeve sweater for like £16 on Depop. Right now, that exact same sweater, brand new, can be anywhere between £40 to £80, which is insane. Which is actually the main reason I got into vintage. I was just tired of getting ripped off. We all can't live in detached houses and go on bottomless Prosecco brunch over the weekends. So vintage clothing and thrifting was a really great way to keep me interested in fashion at like an affordable price point. So on the flip side of all this, you can more or less come to the conclusion that you can buy more for less, which means you can pad out that wardrobe with a chunkier collection of vintage yawns. There's a strong argument to suggest that vintage clothing is accidentally sustainable as well, because it's already secondhand, it's already served its primary purpose. So everything past that initial point is like recycling, upcycling, repurposing, whatever you want to do with it. Also, in my personal experience, vintage clothing retains its value a lot more than when you buy something new. Why wouldn't you want to get all of your money back that you've put into an investment? And it just keeps the community alive and keeping that whole sustainability cycle going. I've personally kept a piece for so long that it actually went up in value when it came time to sell it, so that's always a plus. So I think what I'm trying to say is vintage is not just affordable, it also retains its value. In a roundabout way, it's the cheapest way to buy clothes. So now you're sitting there thinking to yourself, well, those are all really good points of how to upgrade my wardrobe, big man, but can I procure some vintage yawns? Don't worry, fam, I got you, because I'm dedicating an entire section of where to buy those vintage garms. So let's just start off with the most obvious one, thrifting. For me, thrifting has always been a big player in procuring vintage garms. It makes the affordable even more affordable, going to charity shops, thrift stores, car boot sales, flea markets. And the whole point of thrifting is you have to do a little bit of digging. It's more or less like treasure hunting, but instead of being Indiana Jones getting the Holy Grail, it's more like a Ralph Lauren Polo Sport t-shirt. So thrifting is ground zero when it comes to buying vintage clothing. I have multiple videos on the subject, so I'll be leaving them in cards or in the comment section. Next up, I want to talk about physical vintage stores. This is a lot different from actually thrifting, just because the entire store is curated. Imagine they've taken a charity shop or a thrift store, and imagine they've taken out all of the Blue Harbour, Marks and Spencers and Primark clothes and just left the good. That's essentially a vintage store. They're just highly curated, hand-picked, and more or less a shrine to everything good and holy. If you're in the UK, I would suggest hitting up Shoreditch and Brick Lane. They've got so many vintage stores concentrated in that area alone. Or if you're outside of London, I definitely recommend going to 99 Vintage in Winchester. So just a few recommendations. Social media and marketplaces is also a really good place to get vintage clothing from. You'll find sellers on anything from Instagram to Depop to eBay to Grail to Etsy. Facebook groups and marketplaces, like, it's all there. Not everything on these platforms are vintage, but it's a very good place to kind of online thrift. There are a lot of independent businesses who use this platform as well, such as myself. It's a great way to go fishing for pieces. More times than not, prices can be negotiable. And last but certainly not least, vintage online stores. Now, these are standalone websites which have transcended the social media platform and have decided to go it on their own. This, I would say, is a happy medium between a physical vintage store and just online marketplaces. Online stores. And that was today's short little video on how vintage can upgrade your wardrobe. I decided to keep this video short and sweet. I didn't want to bombard you with so much information. In fact, I want to go a little bit more in depth with this topic in the comment section down below. If you've got any questions or you want to discuss this topic, then please leave some F in the chat. I'd very much like to get your opinions on this topic, so F's. If you like today's video, then please give it a like. If you dislike this video, then give it a dislike. If you want to support me and the channel, then just press that little subscribe button and the little bell if you want to get notified when I upload a new video. Summer of Sickness coming July 1st. Thank you guys for watching my videos. You guys are the best. Bye. I've nearly forgot what to say.